Highlights from today's stories. I'd seen plenty of patients with delusions before, but something about Sarah's voice sent chills down my spine. Her eyes were fixed on the far corner of the room, where the old plaster had begun to crack and peel. That's when the screaming started. What made our lab unique was our specimen, a human head preserved in a jar of yellowing formaldehyde. We called her Eleanor. A secluded wing on the top floor of the Salmon Building that was used to house violent and criminally insane patients who were deemed not guilty by reason of insanity. The night shift at the State Lunatic Hospital at Danvers. It was my final rotation as a psychiatric resident at Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts, also known as the State Lunatic Hospital. Most people know it as the inspiration for H.P. Lovecraft's Arkham Sanitarium, but what they don't know is that the real history of Danvers is far more terrifying than any fiction. It was a bitter December night in 1992 when everything changed. The hospital was already scheduled for closure within months, and our patient count had dwindled to less than 50, scattered throughout a building designed to house hundreds. Most of the Gothic structure's wings had already been abandoned, their corridors collecting dust and memories. I was covering the night shift in the East Wing, where we kept our most severe cases. The skeleton crew consisted of just myself, 2 nurses, and an orderly named Mike. The wind howled through the building's deteriorating architecture, creating an endless symphony of whispers and moans that we'd all grown accustomed to. Around 2 a.m., Nurse Chen called me to check on patient 273, Sarah Winters. Sarah had been admitted 3 months prior with severe catatonia, barely moving or speaking, but that night, something was different. When I entered her room, she was sitting upright in bed, rocking back and forth, mumbling something under her breath. As I approached, I couldn't make out her words. They're waking up, all of them, in the walls. I'd seen plenty of patients with delusions before, but something about Sarah's voice sent chills down my spine. Her eyes were fixed on the far corner of the room, where the old plaster had begun to crack and peel. That's when the screaming started. It came from the abandoned West Wing, a wing that hadn't housed patients in over a year. Mike, the orderly, immediately grabbed his flashlight to investigate. I told him to wait for me, but he insisted he'd just be a minute. That was the last time anyone saw Mike alive. The police report would later state that Mike's body was never found, but they didn't see what I saw in the security footage before the power went out. Mike's flashlight beam swinging wildly as he ran down the corridor, illuminating glimpses of multiple figures shambling behind him. Figures in antiquated hospital gowns, their movements jerky and unnatural. What the report also doesn't mention is what we found in the walls when they finally demolished the building. Behind the crumbling plaster were dozens of patient records dating back to the 1930s, detailing unauthorized experiments conducted by a Dr. Malcolm Rivers. The documents described attempts to achieve collective consciousness through electroshock therapy and experimental drugs. But most disturbing of all was Dr. Rivers' final note, dated 1939. Success at last. Their minds are one. They sleep now, waiting in the walls. But they will wake again when the barriers between worlds grow thin. Sarah Winters was released 2 weeks after that night, her catatonia mysteriously cured. She had no memory of her time at Danvers, save for one thing. She couldn't stop talking about the dreams she'd had while catatonic. Dreams of being trapped in the walls, connected to countless other minds, waiting for the right moment to emerge. That thing in room 108. This is the story of Lena Thorne, a student at the University of Minnesota's dental school. I was a first-year resident, eager to start my career. But what I witnessed in those halls would make me question everything I thought I knew about life and death. I was assigned to work in the anatomy lab in room 108. The room was used for dental students to study human anatomy, particularly the head and neck regions. What made our lab unique was our specimen, a human head preserved in a jar of yellowing formaldehyde. We called her Eleanor. The head had been donated to the school decades earlier, though the paperwork had long since been lost. She was a teaching tool, nothing more. At least that's what we told ourselves. I first noticed something strange during late-night study sessions. The preservation fluid in Eleanor's jar would sometimes ripple when no one was near it. Equipment would move slightly between classes, even though the room was locked. But these were easy to dismiss: old buildings settling, janitors cleaning, that sort of thing. Then the students started complaining about headaches and nosebleeds after working in room 108. Some reported feeling watched. Others said they could hear whispers when they were alone in the lab. We checked for gas leaks, mold, anything that could explain the symptoms. We found nothing. The incidents escalated one night when I was working late. I was updating inventory when I heard a soft tapping sound. It was coming from Eleanor's jar. At first I thought it was just the building's pipes, but when I looked closer, I saw something impossible. Eleanor's eyes were open. I ran from the room and didn't return until morning. In the light of day, everything seemed normal. Eleanor's eyes were closed as they had been for decades. I convinced myself I had imagined it, but then I noticed something that made my blood run cold: tiny scratch marks on the inside of the glass. Other staff members began reporting strange experiences. Professor Anderson claimed he saw Eleanor's lips move during the lecture. A student swore she saw tears of blood running down the specimen's cheeks. The medical explanations, decomposition gases, fluid displacement, light refraction, became harder to believe. One evening, while cleaning the lab, I found an old file tucked behind a cabinet. It contained documents from the 1940s about Eleanor's donation. According to the paperwork, she had been an immigrant who died in a state hospital. But there was something else. A note from the receiving doctor mentioning that the woman had been a practicing medium who claimed she could transfer her consciousness into inanimate objects. The next morning, Eleanor's jar was empty. The police investigation turned up nothing. They searched the entire building but found no trace of the specimen. No signs of break-in, no evidence of theft. It was as if Eleanor had simply disappeared. The university quickly replaced the specimen and tried to forget the incident. Room 108 was renovated, the old equipment replaced, but strange things still happened there. Students report feeling cold spots, seeing shadows move against the light, hearing whispers, and so on. Years later, I found an article about the state hospital where Eleanor had died. According to records, she had been admitted after claiming she could keep living after death through a demonic ritual. The doctors diagnosed her with paranoid delusions. But sometimes, when I think about those scratch marks on the inside of the jar, I wonder, what if she wasn't delusional? What if she knew what she was doing, only it didn't go exactly as she planned? Not guilty by reason of insanity. When I read this creepypasta, it reminded me of the events from Danvers State Mental Hospital. But there was one chilling detail that set it apart. It was a bitter November morning when I first arrived at Norwich State Hospital in Preston, Connecticut. The sprawling complex sat isolated among dense woodlands along the Thames River, straddling the Preston-Norwich line. I was young, ambitious, and naive, eager to start my psychiatric residency at what was then considered a prestigious institution. The facility, originally named Norwich State Hospital for the Insane, had opened its doors in 1904 and had a long history of treating mental illness patients. From my first day, I was drawn to the mysterious experimental therapy ward, a secluded wing on the top floor of the Salmon Building that was used to house violent and criminally insane patients who were deemed not guilty by reason of insanity. My orientation paperwork mentioned a controversial research program studying new treatments for severe psychiatric conditions, but something about the program director's notes seemed off. The first red flag appeared when I was reviewing patient files. Several patients who had been transferred to the experimental ward had their records abruptly end, with no discharge notes or follow-up documentation. When I asked the senior staff about this, they quickly changed the subject or gave vague non-answers. One evening, while working late, I found a hidden file cabinet behind some old equipment in the hospital's records room. Inside was a folder labeled Project Reset, with documents detailing highly unethical experiments conducted by Dr. Marcus Wells, the former head of research. The papers described using extreme sensory deprivation combined with experimental drugs to supposedly reset patients' minds. But there was something else. In his personal notes, Dr. Wells wrote about achieving breakthrough results when combining the treatments with ancient meditation techniques he'd learned during his travels in Tibet. He claimed these methods could allow patients to transcend their physical forms and merge consciousness with others. The deeper I dug, the darker it got. I found interview transcripts where patients reported experiencing shared hallucinations and being able to feel each other's thoughts. Multiple subjects described seeing shadowy figures during their treatments that would whisper to them in unknown languages. Then came the incident that made regional headlines, though most people have forgotten about it now. All 8 patients in the experimental ward were found catatonic in their rooms, with their eyes completely white and rolling back in their heads. Dr. Wells was found dead in the ward's treatment room. The official cause was listed as a drug overdose, but the autopsy noted unusual brain activity patterns and unexplainable cellular changes in his tissue samples. The patients never recovered. They were transferred to various facilities across Connecticut, where they remained in their catatonic state, occasionally jolting into consciousness and whispering to themselves the same phrase over and over.
"They're coming through. They are coming through. They are coming through."
I couldn't let it go. I kept investigating, tracking down former staff members who had worked in the experimental ward. Most refused to talk, but one elderly nurse finally opened up after I showed her the Project Reset files. "Those weren't treatments," she said, her hands shaking as she lit a cigarette. Dr. Wells wasn't trying to cure anyone, he was trying to create something. He said he'd found a way to thin the barriers between minds. But not just between people. He thought he could open connections to other places. The nurse described how patients would sometimes speak in perfect synchronization, describing identical visions of a vast, dark space filled with shifting shadows and whispered voices. During the final experiment, Dr. Wells had apparently connected himself to all 8 patients simultaneously. Whatever he saw on the other side was too much for his mind to take. What compels me to finally share this story is what I found in my research. Those original patients, they're still alive despite being in their 80s and 90s now. Their state hasn't changed since that final experiment, but every few years, more patients across the region start showing similar symptoms, as if it is spreading, like a psychic infection. Whatever door Dr. Wells opened, I don't think it ever closed.